At that prenatal appointment with your physician, we go over everything that has happened in the pregnancy. By this point, we normally have the results of whatever genetic testing you decided to do with the support of the genetics department. We go over the results of the ultrasounds and the nuchal translucency, and we talk about your plan of care for the rest of the pregnancy. This is at the point where we have the big graduation party for you because now you passed the first trimester. The reason that this is such an important milestone in pregnancy is because miscarriage rates really decrease after the 12-week mark.
Welcome to My Fertility Podcast, Superhumans, the show that brings you expert insights, personal stories, and the latest in fertility care all in one place.
Whether you're starting your fertility journey, navigating challenges, or just exploring your options, we're here to empower you with knowledge, support, and hope.
Join us as we dive deep into topics that matter most, from IVF and fertility treatments to mental health and wellness.
I'm Dr. Mavis Garcia.
And I'm Dr. Wise. We're two of the fertility specialists at Markham Fertility Centre in Markham, Ontario, Canada. Think of us as your sisters in all things fertility. Let's demystify the world of fertility together. Welcome back. On today's episode, we're starting a series all about you're pregnant. Now what?
Yay!
First of all, congratulations if you are listening to this and you just found out that you are pregnant. It's both incredibly scary, incredibly exciting, and we are here for you.
The excitement and the scary part all come together. I know it's like a big wave of emotions when this happens after you've waited so long for this moment. The first thing that we're going to do at Markham Fertility Centre is confirm your pregnancy test with blood work. The blood work is looking for HCG or human chorionic gonadotropin. This is the so-called pregnancy hormone. We are going to test that and then we're going to repeat it again in 48 hours to see that it's going up. We are expecting that the HCG level approximately doubles every 2 to 3 days.
One thing that we're not going to talk about is what a normal HCG is when you do your first beta HCG level. And the reason for that is because what is normal or what can lead to a healthy pregnancy can vary so much. And what is quote unquote normal or what is expected can range very widely. So we're not going to give you a number today for that very reason.
Our goal here is to educate you, not to increase your anxiety levels.
Exactly. And the reason I say is because that's a very common question that comes up all the time. So we really are not focusing on what that first number is. We really want to see how that number is rising. And that's really going to help us predict to some degree, again, not perfect predictor, whether the pregnancy is going to continue on or not.
In addition to checking your HCG levels, we're also checking another hormone, and that is the TSH or the thyroid stimulating hormone. We want to monitor what this hormone is at the very beginning of the pregnancy. And if it is elevated, then you might need to start thyroid replacement therapy and be followed by an endocrinologist in the first trimester. Now, the guidelines as to what level the thyroid should be in the first trimester are changing. And by the time that this is published, could potentially be different than what they are today. And we promise you, we are going to bring an expert on the podcast to talk exclusively about thyroid in pregnancy.
Okay, so now that we have confirmed that the HCG level is rising nicely, the next step is to book your first ultrasound or your first viability ultrasound. So that first ultrasound is going to get booked at about 7 weeks of pregnancy or about 3 weeks after we would have expected that you would have gotten your period. So again, very important to point out that even though we say that somebody is 7 weeks pregnant, they may have actually only had their embryo transfer, let's say, around 5 weeks earlier, because whether the pregnancy is conceived naturally or whether the pregnancy is conceived by IUI or IVF, the convention is to start measuring pregnancy from the time of the first day of the last menstrual period. So again, that can be a little bit misleading or a little bit confusing when we talk about being 7 weeks pregnant, but your embryo transfer was only done something around, 4 or 5 weeks earlier.
We know that first ultrasound is a period of high anxiety and a lot of anticipation. So, here at Markham Fertility Center, your ultrasound will be booked. It will be done in the same facilities that you're familiar with, where you had your cycle monitoring. The ultrasonographer is not able to give you a lot of detail, but if there is a heartbeat present, they will show you on the screen at that point. And then after the ultrasound is completed, you'll come back to the waiting room and you will meet with one of our nurses. So you're able to get the information on the ultrasound right away. At that point, the nurses will tell you what we see on the ultrasound, and we're going to have a whole episode talking about first trimester ultrasounds and what they mean. But in general terms, we explain if there is one or two babies, what the heartbeat is, and any other information on the ultrasound. The nurses will talk to you about any pregnancy symptoms that you're experiencing. They will remind you of what medications you need to be taking, and then they will arrange for you to have a follow up ultrasound. Now, that follow up ultrasound is technically not medically necessary. Medically necessary would be an ultrasound at 7 weeks and another one at 12 weeks, which we're going to talk about later in the episode. But we know again how difficult it is to wait between ultrasounds and how much anxiety there is when you're first pregnant after either a history of miscarriages or a history of infertility. So we offer our patients another ultrasound, usually at about 9 to 10 weeks. That ultrasound, like I mentioned, is mostly for reassurance. And again, you get the opportunity to see the baby growing on the screen and to meet with the nurses, discuss how the pregnancy is going, and make sure that you're having all your medications ready and all of your questions answered.
Usually around that time, in about the 9-10 week mark, we're also going to start introducing the concept of genetic testing so that you can hear about all of your genetic testing options for your pregnancy. Our very incredible genetic counseling department at MFC offers a free webinar to all pregnant patients to explain prenatal genetic testing options. We also have a fantastic episode about this, and that's prenatal screening episode 42, where Diane Myles Reid joined us and discussed all of the options as well. Your prenatal genetic testing options will vary depending on how the pregnancy was conceived and what we might recommend.
So now it is time for what we call the 12-week ultrasound. The 12-week ultrasound can be done between 11 and 13 weeks. And this is a medically indicated ultrasound. And at this point, we're looking at something very specific called the nuchal translucency. The nuchal translucency is a measurement of the thickness at the back of the baby's neck, and this thickness can be a predictor for the health of the baby, specifically genetic abnormalities as well as congenital heart abnormalities. This measurement is very important, and it has to be done by ultrasonographers that are qualified in taking this measurement. Once again, if the nuchal translucency ultrasound is done at Markham Fertility Center, you would meet with the team right away to get the information on the ultrasound. And then at that point, we book what we call a prenatal appointment with your physician. At that prenatal appointment with your physician, we go over everything that has happened in the pregnancy. By this point, we normally have the results of whatever genetic testing you decided to do with the support of the genetics department. We go over the results of the ultrasounds and the nuchal translucency, and we talk about your plan of care for the rest of the pregnancy. This is at the point where we have the big graduation party for you because now you passed the first trimester. The reason that this is such an important milestone in pregnancy is because miscarriage rates really decrease after the 12-week mark. So at this point, you are pregnant, the miscarriage rate is very low, and you are ready to graduate from Markham Fertility Center.
A very common question that we get all the time is asking about the risk of miscarriage during the first trimester and how that risk of miscarriage may change over the first trimester. So let's talk a little bit about that. First of all, if you are interested in learning more about miscarriage, we've covered the topic in previous episodes of this podcast, and that was episode 43 episode 46 and episode 53. So you can have a listen. The risk of miscarriage drops significantly over the course of the first trimester. So in that, time of around missing your first period, so let's say around 4 to 5 weeks, that risk of miscarriage can be somewhere between 25 and 30%. But by the time you've done your first ultrasound and we're seeing that nice heartbeat, the risk drops significantly down to about 5 to 10%. By the time you're getting to your nuchal translucency ultrasound or that 12-week ultrasound, the risk is now less than 1%. And this is why conventionally most people wait until the end of the first trimester before they announce their pregnancy.
I want to go back to this graduation party because everybody knows I like a good party.
And Dr. Garcia throws the best parties. That is absolutely true.
The graduation appointment is actually a mixed bag of emotions. Sometimes it's a bit of a double edge because patients obviously are very happy to be pregnant and to have accomplished what they set out to do in the first place, but they're also sad to leave Markham Fertility Centre and the care of the doctor. Sometimes this is a relationship that has taken years, and there is a safety in being familiar with your doctor and your team and your environment. And of course, we like to surround our patients with love and tender care. So I know a lot of my patients tell me, and you might have seen this post on social media where they're happy to graduate, but they're kind of sad to be leaving. I want to spend a little bit of time about that. Those feelings are normal. They make a lot of sense and they're valid. But what we really strive is to provide you with a really seamless transition from fertility care to obstetrical care. We actually make the referral to your obstetrical doctor of your choice. It could be an obstetrician or it could be a midwife. So we actually get this information from you at that first ultrasound that we talked about 6 to 7 weeks. We make the referral at that time. And usually, because it takes a little bit of time for the new office to accept you and give you an appointment, by the time the 12 weeks comes around, you should have an appointment ready to go. So the care goes easily transition from fertility to obstetrics so that you're never kind of lost in between. The other thing that I mentioned is that because this is such a big milestone, we actually want you to reflect on it and to have a memento of this moment. We actually give our graduating patients a little baby onesie that they get to keep and handwritten card that usually the care team writes. And we love seeing these babies when they're born 9 months later wearing the onesies. You probably have seen many of those on social media. We have them tagged in our Markham Fertility Instagram account. And we love getting those pictures of our babies dress ups in the graduation onesies.
And it's worth noting that if you do not get a onesie at your 12-week prenatal appointment, it's not because you don't deserve one. It's because
Yes.
sometimes it's because sometimes we just run out of them, and we
Yes.
promise we're gonna mail it to you as soon as they're back.
That's right. That's right. Thank you for saying that. Actually, my mom is the one. She doesn't make the onesies. We have a lady in Kitchener that makes them for us. And she used to be a fertility patient, actually. But then it's my parents have to go to Kitchener and pick up the order. And then my mom, actually, in her home, she puts them into a lot of bags with the gift bags and everything. And then that boxes get delivered to Markham Fertility Center by my dad. So it's so you're getting a gift from the Markham Fertility team from my parents. But yeah, that is a whole process. So thank you for saying that. You're
Yes,
absolutely
but we
right.
promise we're not forgotten. We promise.
And if we did forget, just send an email and say, "Can I please get my onesie? I haven't gotten one. I will mail it for you."
Yeah. I think something I really wanna highlight actually that you just mentioned is that we really want to make sure that that transfer of care to whoever your prenatal care provider is that it's seamless. And so that is why we are so adamant, I guess, about getting that referral in as soon as possible. For many patients, especially patients maybe who've had recurrent miscarriages, when we're asking about who they want to see in pregnancy, some patients aren't mentally ready to even make that
Mhm. That's
leap,
right.
let's say in their minds to think about that. But it's so, so important that we get that referral in ASAP as soon as you've got your first viability scan because Certainly, in our experience, OB care providers fill up extremely quickly. And I would hate for you not to have the OB care provider that you want and that you're going to your third, fourth, oh my God, even fifth choice sometimes, just because we didn't get the referral in quickly enough. So, even though it can be hard to mentally plan or mentally think about or prepare for that OB care provider, just so much better if we can get that referral in sooner so that you can be seeing the person that you really want to see. So that is why we're so adamant about it.
There's usually tears at that appointment, and those are happy tears. One of the things that I love about that appointment, and if you're my patient, you've probably noticed that, is I like to reflect on the journey that we had together. And I usually bring up the highs and the lows and remember when you told me this and remember when you said that and remember when we had this conversation. It's honestly one of my favorite things that I do in my practice is having that moment of like reflection and looking back and honoring everything that we did together to get you to this point.
I always tell my patients that 12-week prenatal appointment that we love baby pictures. When you send us baby pictures or pictures of the baby in the onesie after they're delivered, we love those updates and they mean so, so, so much to us because it's a great reminder that that little lima bean that we see on the ultrasound goes on to become an actual baby. And it's very rewarding and we love it. And it reminds us
Yeah.
of why we're doing the job that we do and why we love our job so much. So please send us baby pictures. We absolutely adore them.
We love them so much that we actually put them on our teens virtual channel. So for the whole clinic to see and celebrate. So your babies become very special. All right. So switching gears, let's talk now about a common question that we get at that appointment, which is about prenatal vitamins. Now we have a whole episode about prenatal vitamins, and that is episode 10 of the podcast. So refer back to that. But just a quick primer here on that. For prenatal vitamins, we want to make sure that you have a prenatal vitamin that has folic acid. And that's the actual folic acid, not another form of folic acid, which we go into detail in episode 10. The dose of folic acid that we want is 400 micrograms for people that have low risk of neural tube defects and up to 5,000 micrograms for people that are at high risk for neural tube defects.
In addition to a prenatal vitamin, many people will also want to consider adding in extra vitamin D. So, a prenatal vitamin may contain a little bit of vitamin D, but oftentimes not enough, especially for those of us living in Canada, where right now, as of April 2nd, we haven't seen the sun in maybe 6 months.
And I go
Uh,
a little crazy during that time. Okay.
yeah, me too. So, you want to aim for getting about 1,500 to 2,000 units of vitamin D on a daily basis. So, that could be some of it coming from your prenatal and some of it coming from an extra vitamin D supplement as well.
Another important supplement is omega 3 fatty acids. And again, some prenatal vitamins contain a bit of that, but ideally, we want to have approximately 1,500 milligrams of omega 3 fatty acids. So you might need to supplement on top of your prenatal vitamins.
Another supplement that is probably not as well known, I would say, is choline. There's increasing evidence these days for people in pregnancy to take an extra choline supplement, as that can further reduce the risk of neural tube defects and other birth defects. For patients who are pregnant, the recommendation in the first trimester is to take 450 milligrams daily of choline.
Another common question that comes up, in addition to what prenatals and what supplements to take, would be what should I avoid eating during pregnancy? So this is a big area, and we're going to spend a bit of time here talking about that. While you're pregnant, one of the things that you should be avoiding is raw or undercooked food, specifically meat, fish, and eggs. So things like sushi, sashimi, beef tartare, for instance, these eggs that are not cooked, these things can lead to an infection with salmonella or E. coli and listeria. And these are all bacteria that can cause complications in pregnancy, such as miscarriage or even a stillbirth.
The reason why we have this higher level of concern for these foods in pregnancy is because in pregnancy, you are slightly immunocompromised, meaning that your immune system is not functioning as well as it does outside of pregnancy. I always tell patients that, it's going to be the pregnant person who gets food poisoning or who gets sick while nobody else does. And it's always the pregnant person who gets more sick for longer generally. And so that's why eating things like sashimi or eating things like beef tartare outside of pregnancy, you may be fine and feel fine and not get ill, but the risk is higher in pregnancy. And that's why we recommend avoiding it.
Now, we mentioned fish, and fish actually is an excellent source of healthy omega 3s in pregnancy. So, as long as it is well cooked, it is okay to eat fish in pregnancy. However, some types of fish contain high levels of mercury, and mercury can affect your baby's developing nervous system. In terms of fish to avoid, that would be things like shark, swordfish, king mackerel, and tilefish. These fish should be completely avoided during pregnancy because of the high mercury content. Some safer fish choices would be things like salmon, shrimp, tilapia, and sardines. These fish contain high levels of omega 3 fatty acids without the high mercury content. And ideally, safe to consume about 2 to 3 servings of this type of fish per week.
Generally speaking, when I'm thinking about fish and mercury levels, the way that I sort of think about it or the way that I remember it is that the smaller the fish, generally the lower the mercury levels are going to be. And generally, the less expensive the fish, you're probably also going to have lower levels of mercury as well. So when I go and buy tuna, I always buy like the cheap skipjack tuna because it actually has lower levels of mercury than the more expensive, fancy albacore canned tuna, for instance. Again, the reason is that albacore tuna is a bigger fish. And if we go back to like high school biology and we think about this bioamplification, this idea that, a big fish is going to eat a lot of little fish and is going to get higher levels of mercury as well. So that if you're eating smaller fish, you're going to get lower levels of mercury. So save your money, buy the cheap canned tuna.
So there you go. My fertility podcast doesn't only provide education, but it also saves you money. Because I didn't realize that. So now I'm going to change my tuna buying practices.
Yeah, for the canned tuna, just buy the cheap one.
I buy a lot of canned tuna. Yeah.
I know you too.
It's got protein. You know me and protein.
Oh, yeah, 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 absolutely. Moving away from fish and meat, another big area of food or of your diet to consider is dairy products. Dairy products can be an excellent source of calcium. Calcium requirements do go up in pregnancy and protein. And again, we love protein. But during pregnancy, it's really important to ensure that all dairy products you consume are pasteurized. Again, unpasteurized dairy products have a higher risk of having foodborne illnesses like salmonella, listeria that we spoke about earlier. Generally speaking, when it comes to cheeses, you want to avoid soft cheeses like brie or camembert or blue vein cheeses unless they're clearly labeled as pasteurized. You want to stick with yogurt, milk, cottage cheese as long as they are pasteurized. And generally speaking, if you're buying something at the grocery store, the vast majority of dairy products are going to be pasteurized, but always good to read your labels.
Another concern is that of deli meats and prepared foods. Deli meats and some prepared foods for sure are very convenient, but they can pose some risks during pregnancy. Deli meats like ham, turkey, or salami, sometimes they can be contaminated with listeria. So if you choose to eat deli meats, you can, but one thing that you can do is to heat it until they're steaming hot before consumption to kill any potential bacteria. I would also advise to avoid refrigerated pate or meat spreads, as they can also harbor listeria. And smoked seafood. Smoked seafood can also contain listeria, so I would avoid refrigerated smoked seafood unless it is an ingredient in a cooked dish, something that is already cooked so that it can kill any contamination with bacteria.
Moving on to fruits and vegetables, of course, it's always important to wash and prepare them properly. Again, they are a vital part of a healthy pregnancy diet, but proper handling and preparation are key. So if you're consuming raw fruits, vegetables, make sure that they are washing them thoroughly under running water before eating, peeling, or cooking them. Sprouts, so things like alfalfa, clover, radish sprouts should be avoided as they have a higher risk of things like salmonella or E. coli. Now, if you're eating cooked sprouts, those are safe to eat, but raw sprouts generally should be avoided in pregnancy.
I'm going to now talk about caffeine and alcohol. And while they're technically not a food, although for me, caffeine has its own
Whole food group.
food group because I live on it, but it's technically not considered a food, go figure. But they do warrant a special consideration during pregnancy. So for alcohol, it's important to understand there is no safe level of alcohol consumption in pregnancy. That means there is no study that can tell you this amount is safe and this amount is not safe. Potentially, any amount of alcohol can lead to a condition called fetal alcohol syndrome in pregnancy. Sometimes people are very concerned because they might not have realized that they're pregnant and they might have a drink here and there. And I usually reassure patients when they call me with this concern because it's unlikely to cause any problems. But that is very different from saying that it's totally fine to drink alcohol once you know you're pregnant. I would never advise anybody that there is a safe level of alcohol in pregnancy.
When it comes to caffeine, we're thinking about caffeine from coffee, teas, chocolate, especially dark chocolate can also contain higher levels of caffeine, as can pop like Coke and Pepsi and all that. High levels of caffeine during pregnancy are associated with an increased risk of miscarriage and low birth weight. So, generally in pregnancy, it's recommended to limit caffeine intake to about 200, 250 milligrams per day, which is roughly equivalent to one small cup of coffee per day. You don't have to cut out coffee completely, but one small coffee per day is probably okay. If you're somebody who really loves the smell of coffee, the taste of coffee, I often sometimes will recommend you can consider something like decaf coffee, or you can take regular coffee and decaf coffee and do half and half so that you get a little bit of a caffeine boost without getting that full amount of caffeine if you're a big coffee aficionado.
Like me.
Yes.
Speaking of coffee, it's also good to talk about herbal teas and which ones are safe to consume during pregnancy. But first, we have to look at the different types of teas and how they're made. We have herbal teas and non herbal teas. And the non herbal teas can be divided into three categories, which is black, green, and oolong. From the non herbal tea, black tea is the most common type of non herbal tea. That would include things such as English breakfast and Earl Grey or orange pekoe. Green tea has a more delicate taste than black tea, and oolong teas are a combination of green and black teas. Non herbal teas contain varying amounts of caffeines and antioxidants. They're also made from the leaves of the tea plant. And the longer they're oxidated or fermented, the higher the caffeine level of the non herbal teas. Also, the brewing time of the non herbal tea can influence how much caffeine is in the tea. There are some decaffeinated versions of non herbal teas, but they still contain a little bit of caffeine.
Now, herbal teas are different in the sense that they're made from the roots, berries, flowers, seeds, leaves of a variety of different plants, but not from actual tea plant leaves. True herbal teas do not contain caffeine. But again, some of them can carry varying risks in pregnancy.
So, with this explanation about herbal and non herbal teas, let's talk about which teas are safe in pregnancy. On the non herbal tea categories, they have great health benefits like antioxidants, but they also contain caffeine. So, the average cup of non herbal tea contains about 40 to 50 milligrams of caffeine. A decaffeinated non-herbal tea can have about zero point 0.4 milligrams of caffeine. As we talked about it, caffeine crosses the placenta, can reach a developing baby. And therefore, you want to think about how much coffee and how much caffeine in the non-herbal teas to make a decision about how much of this to drink.
Herbal teas are naturally caffeine free. So when somebody's thinking about drinking herbal tea, caffeine's really not the issue. But the concern is that with these herbal teas during pregnancy is that there's a lack of data available on most herbs and their effects on a developing fetus. And so there are really mixed opinions on the safety of herbal teas for both pregnant and even non-pregnant women.
Yeah, so let's go over some different types of herbal teas and the ingredients in them and what some of the evidence about them says. So, for example, red raspberry leaf. We know that this is safe in pregnancy, or at least likely safe. It is rich in iron and it can help with milk production and also decrease nausea and ease of labor pains. There is some controversy about whether or not this should be used throughout the pregnancy or only in the second and third trimester. So, a lot of healthcare providers will remain cautious and only recommend using it after the first trimester is completed.
Now, teas that include things like peppermint leaf or ginger root are most likely safe, and they are actually very often recommended, especially in the first trimester, because they can relieve some of the nausea and morning sickness.
Teas that contain something like lemon balm, it's likely safe and it has a calming effect and helps relieve some of the irritability and insomnia associated with pregnancy.
Although probably not as popular, teas containing dandelion or chamomile, they really don't have enough information to let us know if they're safe or not in pregnancy. Probably best to avoid them just because we can't really provide much reassurance that they are safe to take in pregnancy.
There are other teas that are also not very commonly used. For example, rose hips, alfalfa, and yellow dog are considered to be unsafe or there is insufficient reliable information about them to consider them safe in pregnancy.
Really, bottom line is that you can always ask your healthcare provider if you're not sure about something or if you're looking for further guidance. But, as a healthcare provider, unfortunately, there's not a lot of evidence to reassure us that certain things are safe. So, your healthcare provider very often may advise you not to eat something or not to take something or drink something just because we can't provide that reassurance that it is safe in pregnancy.
Another thing that comes up besides caffeine and teas and alcohol and foods is this idea of artificial sweeteners in pregnancy. I think this deserves a spot in our podcast today. Artificial sweeteners are ingredients that add sweetness to foods. As we know, sweeteners are in a lot of things like soft drinks, desserts, candies, and pastries. There is two categories: the ones that contain calories, they have nutrition, and the ones that are non-nutritive, which are the ones that don't contain any calories. So they're used to add a sweetness to a food without adding calories.
And it's really hard because I'm sure lots of patients in pregnancy are thinking about ways to avoid excess weight gain, which we've talked about in previous episodes, and to avoid things like gestational diabetes. So, on one hand, you want to avoid things like table sugar because you know it's not good for you. But at the same time, you have to eat something,
Yes, and it has to taste decent.
which many things may or may not in pregnancy.
Let's talk about some commonly known artificial sweeteners and when the evidence teaches us about them in pregnancy. So let's start with one called stevia. This is a new and common sweetener that is frequently used in soft drink, and stevia is considered safe by the FDA to use during pregnancy.
Another common sweetener is something called sunnet, or can also be seen on an ingredients list as acesulfame potassium. And again, also very commonly used in baked goods, frozen desserts, puddings, beverages. This one has also been deemed safe to use in moderation during pregnancy by the FDA.
Another one is aspartame, which also comes with the name of Equal or NutraSweet. And that one is also considered to be safe in pregnancy when used in moderation.
Splenda or sucralose is another artificial sweetener that we see in lots of prepackaged foods and can often be seen sort of as a tabletop sweetener where you get those little packets. Sucralose has no effect on blood sugar and no calories and has also been deemed safe by the FDA during pregnancy and lactation.
Now, let's talk about the ones that are not considered to be safe in pregnancy. And the main one here is saccharin, or also known as sweet and low. It's not used as much today, but it still appears in many foods and drinks. The FDA does consider saccharin to be safe for use for the general public. There were some studies that were linking saccharin to increased risk of bladder cancer, but these studies were dismissed by the National Toxicology Program that looked into this evidence. However, we do know that saccharin crosses the placenta and it might remain in fetal tissue. Therefore, its use for pregnant women it still remains in question and it cannot be widely recommended as safe in pregnancy.
We've covered a lot of ground on today's episode. We've gone from that first positive beta up to the first few pregnancy ultrasounds and through the first trimester. And we've gone through some prenatal vitamins, supplements, and diet today. Now, obviously, there's still a lot more to cover in terms of what to do in pregnancy and what not to do in pregnancy. And so this is going to be a multi-part series. On our next episode from this series, we're going to be covering things like lifestyle, weight gain, more around diet and exercise. So stay tuned for that.
See you next time, superhumans.
And that's a wrap for today, superhumans.
If you're looking to connect, get social with us. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram at My Fertility Podcast or visit us online at markhamfertility.com. And don't forget, follow, subscribe, and share your favorite episode.
Thanks for listening to My Fertility Podcast and for being a vital part of our community. We know you've got this.
We're signing off until next Tuesday.
If you found this episode of My Fertility Podcast helpful, please take a moment to head over to the review section and leave us your thoughts. Your reviews and comments are incredibly valuable to us and help guide future episodes. We also welcome you to direct your questions to info@myfertilitypodcast.com.
My Fertility Podcast is produced by Rabbit Media Inc. in conjunction with Dr. Garcia and Dr. Weiss.
Music by Mixkit. Life is a Dream by Michael Ramirez C.
My Fertility Podcast is not intended to replace any type or variation thereof professional medical, health, or legal advice, nor should the content be taken as medical advice. Please contact your primary healthcare professional regarding any medical questions you may have. The information presented in this podcast is based on the knowledge and understanding of the host at the time of recording. Medical knowledge is constantly evolving, and new research may change the understanding of health-related topics. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, we do not guarantee the completeness, accuracy, or timeliness of the content. The views expressed in this podcast by guests are not those of the host or the management. This podcast is not intended to impose any type of discrimination. My Fertility Podcast and its management are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast.